ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's a great privilege to be asked to speak at this conference, and I'm delighted to welcome you all. It's the result of collaboration between the Australian Institute of Criminology and the Victim Services Division of the Department of Attorney-General and Justice. And I think tomorrow my colleague in the Federal Parliament, the Honourable Brendan O'Connor, Minister for Home Affairs, will be present to speak to you as well. The conference will focus on the meeting the needs of victims of crime, which is something I've strived to do throughout my career, particularly during my time at the DP or Crown Prosecutor and then the DPP, more recently in politics. When I became a Crown Prosecutor in 1987 actually, it wasn't that common for prosecutors to have much to do with the victims of crime, except to call them as witnesses. The police and whatever other services were available had to deal with those things, and to a great extent victims were the forgotten people of the criminal justice system. But times changed, and by the mid-90s there was certainly much more recognition. The DPP itself had its witness assistance offices starting up, and that's grown from time to time, and they provide a very important service themselves. Victims of crime struggle with a variety of problems: physical, psychological, financial, spiritual. It's important that we understand their needs and support them appropriately as they move through the criminal justice system. I myself feel like a victim of crime over the Lynn family murders, because Min Lynn, this is the Epping family, the whole 5 of them that were wiped out, was my newsagent. Min Lynn, I knew him. His office was over the road from where my office is. He used to deliver the papers. I used to see him on a Saturday morning anyhow. He was often late, and on that particular Saturday he didn't come. And the various events that occurred after that, including going up to the shop and a crowd of people being sold the paper on the street and still no answer, and then finding out over the radio what had happened and going down to Boundary Road, which is where their house was, and seeing all the police tape and the police blocking the roads and all that. And then the days and months after that, I attended the funeral and spoke at the funeral, looking across at 5 coffins, one after the other, was one of the eeriest feelings I've ever experienced. And although as a prosecutor you learn to guard against getting too involved, I really felt deep sorrow over the whole thing and shed a few tears over it myself, just to look at to consider the extent of the horror of all that matter. But I won't go any further into that. And sometimes I'm sure that prosecutors and judges and probably defence counsel and other people can upset victims. I've upset victims, not deliberately, but sometimes there is a conflict between the role of the prosecutor and the position of the victim, because they're not your clients. Your client is the community, and although they are members of the community, they can't really dictate to you how you run your case. And in one particular trial I was involved in, where I had to call a witness who was a hostile witness who had taken part to an extent in the murder of this victim, a policeman, and he was wounded himself in the scuffle with the murderer and the policeman. The family were dead against that, but other witnesses had gone sour. I had to call this witness so I could cross-examine him on what he'd told the police originally, which was, we thought, an accurate version of what actually happened, and it was backed up by other evidence. But until we could make up for the harm caused by the other witnesses turning around in the witness box, we couldn't be sure that we'd get the case to the jury. And it succeeded. The High Court ultimately ruled that that evidence was appropriately admitted, even though he contradicted it all in front of the jury. But they had the opportunity of seeing what he'd said to the police and hearing it and looking at the other evidence, and they convicted the man, convicted in the case. And in that particular case, the family had been given so much support by the politicians, the Premier included of the day, that they rejected the witness assistance officer and basically depended on me and my solicitor to act as the witness assistance persons each day, every break, up to 15 relatives wanting to talk to you, and you're wanting to just sort of get on with the case. Now, they're lovely people, I love them, but it can be difficult, just let me tell you that. I shouldn't get off my script here. Traditionally in Australia, issues concerning victims of crime have been matters for state and territory governments, but in recent years there have been significant changes in federal legislation responding to emerging trends that involve victims of certain crimes that transcends borders, such as online identity fraud and human trafficking. And after looking through the program that you're facing or you're putting on here for the next couple of days, I'm very impressed at the nature of the matters you're discussing and the quality of your speakers. Dr. Jonathan Doke is the Director of the Criminal Research Justice Research Group at Nottingham Trent University, United Kingdom. He's published widely on victims' issues, including their rights in the criminal justice system. David Levine, former Justice Levine of the Supreme Court, who I've appeared before on a number of occasions, both trials and Court of Criminal Appeal, has been the chairperson of the Serious Offenders Review Council in New South Wales since 2006. He was a judge of both the District Court and in the Supreme Court until his retirement from the bench in 2005. He's no stranger to research, and his own personal library is famous as being one of the largest in Australia, probably rivalling Rodney Cavalier, the former Education Minister, who has a very big library too. The State Library has been a significant beneficiary of this passion of Mr. Levine. Dr. Anne O'Neill is the Director and Founder of Angel Hands, based in Perth. Angel Hands provides support and assistance to those who have been affected by murder or serious personal violence. And she suffered enormous personal tragedy 14 years ago when her estranged husband shot and killed their 2 young children before turning the gun on her. Sadly, we've seen a case like that in the last day or so from Queensland to New South Wales. Dr. O'Neill overcame these events by going back to school and obtaining a social work degree, and there aren't too many people that have the courage to speak from the perspective of a victim, as well as a service provider and a researcher, and so I think we'll get some very valuable input from Dr. O'Neill. The Attorney General and Justice Portfolio is working on better meeting the needs of victims. We have the Victim Access Line that averages 300 calls a day from victims of crime across New South Wales, and is staffed by trained counsellors who help victims navigate the criminal justice system and repair their lives. There's a Victim's Journey website to assist victims at each stage, from the time a crime is reported through the police investigation to prosecution, court processes, sentencing and after court. We all know that being a victim can be confusing and traumatic, but we also know that access to information is empowering and has a significant part to play in recovery. The O'Farrell government recognises the importance of victims' rights, which are enshrined in the Charter of Victims' Rights as part of the Victims' Rights Act 1996. These rights give victims a voice within the justice system and ensure victims are treated with courtesy, compassion and cultural sensitivity as they journey through the criminal justice system. Last year I supported amendments to the Charter, strengthening the existing 17 rights and introducing an additional right facilitating access to a complaints process if the victim's rights have not been met. Previously, the Charter only applied to people employed within government departments, It now applies to non-government agencies and contractors funded by the state who provide services to victims. My department will be helping these agencies to develop a code of practice that is consistent with the principles of the Charter. The code will be available to both service providers and the victims of crime. Victim services will be required to report on this implementation in the department's annual report to Parliament. And I'm really excited that the theme of this conference is meeting the needs of victims of crime and building the evidence to help us do that better. And we can all improve in that regard, particularly in understanding the different problems that arise with different types of victims, and the fact that some views may differ between victims as to what they need and what's best for them. This conference is covering a wide range of issues affecting victims of crime. It also provides an opportunity for service providers to share what is working and alert us to what hasn't worked. But most importantly, it's an opportunity for victims themselves to tell us what they need and how their needs have or haven't been met. The challenge for policymakers, researchers and service providers is to establish better working relationships founded upon an appreciation of each other's roles and experiences. Only by working together will we see these initiatives come to fruition for the benefits of victims of crime. This conference will provide an opportunity for greater interaction and understanding. And as is obvious, my portfolio, Attorney General and Justice, looks after victims' issues. And there's one initiative I'd like to tell you about, and that's the Victims of Crime Research Agenda, which has been developed in consultation with service providers and researchers. Its aim is to stimulate new, high-quality research which directly supports service provisions for victims of crime in New South Wales. It's important because the body of evidence, particularly in an Australian context, of what works best for victims of crime is limited. The research agenda will enable a more systematic approach to research that will deliver findings that are useful at both a policy and operational level. The agenda will be available on the new Victims of Crime Clearinghouse website that my department is developing and is due for launch later this year. This clearinghouse will contain summaries of research articles, reports and conference papers relating to victims of crime from Australia and overseas. Although there are a number of clearinghouses in Australia, such as the Australian Domestic and Family Violence Clearinghouse and the Communities and Family Clearinghouse Australia, this is the first Australian clearinghouse specifically for all victims of crime.